Yes, hello everyone. My name is Alina and I'm a postdoc at the University of St Andrews, and I'm here to talk about Resilient Coast Optimizing Co-Benefit Solutions project, or COPT. I'm here for obvious reasons of proximity, but we have colleagues based at the National Oceanography Centre, including Amani, who presented RESO, Cranfield University, somewhere in the Midlands, and University of Liverpool. I don't think I have to talk much about why we need to think about sort of climate adaptation at the coast, as coasts are always been changing, but with the climate change and sea level rise and accelerated erosion, we see those changes more often, and they're sort of more extreme. And we've seen from Storm Babette and Storm Ashley this year. So we need to think about how we adapt and mitigate for long-term climate change at the coasts. Traditionally, coasts have been protected or defended with sort of hard protection measures, hard engineered solutions, including seawalls, but also groins and sort of other types of rock armor, etc. But now there's definitely moved from these grey measures to more nature-based solutions, green solutions at the coast. And there's a mix of different ways we can do it. We can use sort of natural habitats, restoration of natural habitats, including salt marsh, seagrass, and also sort of mixed approaches with managed realignment, where you breach the defense line and then let it flood and have a secondary wall, and also hybrid approaches that include sort of living shorelines and textured things, tiles. But while we know that there's actually very high recognition of these green solutions, the uptake locally is still quite slow. And this is just an example of managed realignment, which you can see with the blue line is sort of the blue line is how it might continue if we are on the trend, but actually of what is already implemented. But the green line is what we should, how much coastline we should realign to meet the 2030 goal. But managed realignment is not the only option that can be used at the coast. When this project was kind of written, the PIs asked different stakeholders, what are these barriers that might limit this implementation? And some of the things were that there's just not enough holistic methods, and then there's a lot of risk and uncertainty about nature-based solutions that we heard in the previous session, and then also that social acceptance is not really accounted for. So the aim was to develop a new integrated and transdisciplinary system-based framework that will effectively support this transition from hard grey defences to green solutions in coastal and shoreline management. And I'd like to also highlight that we haven't necessarily intended to produce tools per se, but it's more sort of a thinking and frameworks of how we can think about different approaches and maybe adapt something that's already there, but might not necessarily work in practice, as you will see in some of the other slides. And we deploy a very transdisciplinary approach in terms of there's many different disciplines involved, but also there's a strong collaboration with sort of non-academic partners, such as risk management authorities and kind of 5 Coast and Countryside Trust, for example, is involved as well as and users potentially. And I'm going to talk mainly about the work that I have been involved, and it will be sort of more about social perceptions and values, but also a bit about the conceptualizing the coasts as we see them as social ecological systems. So the work is divided into 4 work packages. And we have the first work package that looks at what is the system actually, what do we mean by coast and social ecological system. Then we go into sort of case study sites and think about what is the current situation in these places, and then what could be the future. And then the last work package is to really achieve these co-benefits and sort of tie them together with the transdisciplinary framework. So as I mentioned, we have case study sites, and we have 4 in the UK. We have 2 in Scotland, Erth and St Andrews. We have 1 in North Wales, Pensan, and 1 in England, Heskett Bank. So they are quite different in terms of what's already there for coastal protection measures. So Erth actually doesn't have an official flood protection measure, it's just a clay embankment. St Andrews has a number of more sort of green solutions, such as dune restoration, beach nourishment, and salt marsh restoration. Pensan has a vegetated shingle beach that you can see in the picture, but also has a seawall behind it, as it's next to Taryn, which you might know about the 1990 floods. And Heskett Bank has a already implemented large management reliance scheme. So going into the the outputs, which is the focus of this presentation, is what do we mean by coastal social ecological systems? And we used systems-based approaches at the beginning of the project to really think what's there, what do we mean by it? And one of the approaches is fuzzy cognitive mapping. And this was to really look at what kind of variables are there, how they're connected. And this is one of the examples that came, and there's, I think, 11 maps like this. So they're very, very complex, and they are quite different depending on who you're talking to. And then we also used a soft systems methodology, which is another sort of systems approach. And we do have outputs for this, and I'll put them at the end where you can read a bit more about it. But this was to then think about how do you make these decisions at the coast, and this sort of looked at different steps that might be involved. And this is just one of the kind of illustrations again, because it was 3 different groups, and again it sort of highlights different steps that might be important. So from these 2 approaches, what we can kind of conclude is that lack of the financial resources is definitely a key issue, and there might be some lack of expertise of nature-based solutions sometimes. The different participants see these systems differently, and I think it's quite obvious. But when you are making decisions, that might actually be important to keep in mind, because that kind of defines the priorities, values, and how decisions might be made. Also, it showed that communities are still very often seen as recipients and not actually active participants, which was also highlighted in the sort of subsistence methodology, that community engagement is definitely key in promoting nature-based solutions, but also highlight again the role of financing and the lack of financing, and also the long-term planning. That current maybe 5-year plan doesn't really help with implementing nature-based solutions, and it's more sort of reactive rather than proactive. Then the second work package is about where are we now, and that's going into the case study sites, and that's where I'm going to talk about the work that I've been mainly doing, and it's using sort of mixed methods approaches, including questionnaire, focus groups, and key methodology, and they all are connected, as they are really trying to assess the social acceptance of kind of 2 different levels. What do I mean with social acceptance? Because I think it's something that we hear a lot, and sometimes it's not necessarily very well defined, and we really spent time to think about the concept and how it could be used. Social acceptance has been very well debated in the renewable energy sector literature, and they distinguish sort of three levels, so three dimensions. There's socio-political acceptance, market acceptance, and community acceptance. Socio-political acceptance refers to sort of high-level national agendas, key policies, and I think we can agree that actually on sort of that level, nature-based solutions are well recognized in terms also of flood protection. And then there's market acceptance, which might not always relate to coastal management, but when it comes to maybe blue carbon credits or carbon credits, then that might be more relevant to think about how that kind of is important. And then community acceptance is what happens sort of on the ground in those areas where you're implementing nature-based solutions. And it's a very complex picture because it's not just values and how people feel about it, it's also past experience. Is do they trust those that implement? Do they think that these schemes are implemented fairly? And also, do they think they are effective? Are they worried about uncertainty, risks of costs? So there's a lot of going on to sort of say that, to kind of then create that sort of attitude or behavior. So for this project, we have defined social acceptance as attitude or behavior towards coastal schemes, either on local or broader socio-political level. And we also here term social acceptability, and in this case, we say sort of characteristics of the scheme that lead to the attitude or action. And some of the published work is this key methodology study that involved sort of involved 31 participants from different risk management organizations, academia, residents, and it was trying to understand sort of the higher level acceptance. The method itself involves participants sorting, in this case, 44 statements that were about different types of schemes, green, grey, and hybrid, and they have to sort them in sort of those that they fully agree or disagree, and they're sort of from -5 disagree to +5, and then you cluster them in groups that have similar views. So we had 5 clusters, and as you can see, that actually none of them really were on that scale that preferred grey solutions. So we can say that generally, if you are asking about sort of higher level, broader, general views, people tend to prefer green solutions. Those that are sort of hybrid solutions were part of a group. The cautious practitioners were all from local authority, if I remember correctly, and they were more maybe anxious to go and talk to people about nature-based solutions or potential of implementing something that in 5 years' time they might not actually have money to implement. So then it goes back to the financing and long-term planning as well. And then we also conducted focus groups and survey in those study sites. So this is from the sites. And what we found maybe a bit surprising is that very, very important thing for those were sort of the local development and land use planning aspects, because it's not just coastal flooding, it's always also surface water flooding, and it's about sort of drainage, house development, infrastructure. So those things came up a lot. Then the other sort of main worry was who's responsible, because we had a site where one organisation was responsible for sort of one site, and then the coastline, and then the estuary was someone else, and then there was another organisation, and then the land management was also divided by, so the farmers didn't really know who to go to, and so the fragment of responsibilities is definitely an issue, and also that kind of the permission process. And then also about systems approach, again, respondents were saying that they would love to see that these organizations that collaborate a bit better, and there's a communication between them, and about the cumulative impacts of flooding. As I mentioned, it's not just coastal, it's very often compound. And things that came up as important issues was also the aspect of food security and the value of land, because the sites that we had, 2 of them had grade 1 arable land. So in case of new mandatory alignment or extended mandatory alignment, those lands would be at risk. So how do we sort of have those trade-offs between where do you implement mandatory alignment and what do you keep for food security? The other aspect that is important for the community acceptance is scheme characteristics themselves. And this is sort of, this was an optional question. That's why the response rate is not 100%. But this was to choose their main scheme in those places. And as you can see that, for example, St Andrews, where we, as I mentioned already, sort of green solutions in place, that is one of the most preferred options. But then San, where there's a seawall, I get it's sort of not maybe decide that really all of them might be the kind of their main schemes. But mix of approaches is sort of very, yeah, it's preferred in many cases. And what's important is the visual amenity of these schemes, but also biodiversity and wildlife considerations, and maintenance, who's maintaining, and perceived efficiency. And to kind of summarize that, so the values and norms, the sort of the value of the landscape, the value of the coast, also knowledge about the risks or schemes, and the experience with flooding events is what really determines how the schemes might be perceived, and they are different from site to site. So the site is really important, and that means that education and awareness of, again, the risks and schemes and many different things have to be included, and also requires early and bespoke engagement, because of the you need to understand what the scheme is, what the site is like there. And integrated local knowledge was something that came up as well, that people feel that actually the local knowledge that residents have is not always incorporated, and that it's more that someone down the road somewhere or in another area decides, but they haven't actually seen the site. So yeah, and then we have the work package 3 about where do we go next, and we have a lot of different things happening there, but I'll quickly talk about the 2 workshops that we had, which used deliberation and a kind of a modified driver special state impact responses tips framework. The deliberative workshop in Scotland used, at first we had evidence sessions from all the different researchers, and then they were given sort of 2 possible options, and they could, the participants then sort of mark them from 0 or 1 to 5. And this is just an example, but this is how you can start talking with those residents, or how would you assess the scheme? So especially if you have already research done in the area. Then the other workshop that we did, because there weren't definite two options, we thought we'll try something different, and we used the modified DIPSIA Plus, which we're working on, and it's still work in progress, but sort of show what do we mean and how did we use it. Is that it had also activities from the DAPSIA framework, but what we added was social acceptance, surprise, surprise, and also worldview, and that's something from systems methodology, but not only, it's more from philosophy in general, and how do we see the world and the bigger picture. And what we really wanted to, and what we're aiming now is to actually develop into the responses do not go back into that circle, but go to the next circle where they have another drivers, and it's more temporal dynamics rather than it just goes back into the same things. So that's something we're working, and hopefully it can be developed into a framework as well that can be used. But yeah, to finish, so some of the take-home messages is that fuzzy cognitive mapping identifies how different stakeholders perceive coastal areas. Subsystems methodology can be a tool that explore the requirements for effective coastal management. The concepts of community acceptance and socio-political acceptance really can help to identify those different key factors influencing the acceptance of coastal initiatives. And deliberative workshops can help to understand the reasoning behind prioritizing certain schemes. And the DIPSIA framework that is in the modified DIPSIA framework that's in progress could be also used collaboratively to produce coastal management solutions and to understand main challenges. But we are in the the next phase, so we're doing much more, and we have works on improving community engagement, also developing training and supporting local coastal management or coastal community resilience strategies that we're working in one of the sites. We're also working towards synthesis of case studies and then actually the final framework. And here are some of the outputs that I mentioned. If you go to the project website, outputs, you can find everything that's published so far. Yeah, and that's the team, and that's all. Thank you very much.